I didn't steal anything, Your Honor. I just moved their retirement into my future.
Do you know how much a lifetime of honest work is worth? To Marcus Thorne, it was apparently just a data point to be deleted from a server. That arrogance wasn't whispered. It was broadcast in every smug look he directed at the gallery. I'm Judge Boyd. I've sat on this bench for a long time, and I've seen the many masks that power wears. But what I witnessed in this courtroom was a level of cold-blooded exploitation that shook even my clinical resolve. If you believe that a designer suit and a tech title don't make you untouchable, then you need to hear this. The man standing before me was Marcus Thorne, the 29-year-old CEO of a fintech startup that promised security but delivered ruin. He looked exactly like the version of success the algorithm loves: perfectly tailored suit, a watch that cost more than a family car, and shoes so polished they reflected the courtroom lights. He didn't show the nervous twitch or the heavy breathing I usually see from defendants. Instead, he radiated the casual indifference of someone who believes the rules are merely suggestions for the less fortunate. In my courtroom, authority is not a performance. It is a standard. My bailiff called the case The People versus Marcus Thorne. The charges included massive financial fraud, elder exploitation, and the cold-hearted theft of retirement funds. Thorne stepped forward with a gait that was almost predatory. He didn't just walk to the defendant's table, he occupied it like it was his boardroom. He even had the audacity to glance at his phone as I began to speak. In this room, that isn't just a lack of manners, it is a direct challenge to the system of justice I represent. I told him to put the device away. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the finality of a gavel strike. He looked up with a condescending smile, claiming he was just checking his company's stock. I reminded him that his time was currently the property of the state, and he would be wise to value it accordingly. Before we addressed his polished legal defense, I called the first complainant to the stand, Mrs. Evelyn Reed. She was 78 years old, carrying a cane and a lifetime of dignity that Thorne's money could never buy. Her hands were weathered from decades of work as a school teacher. I've learned to read people through these small details. I could see immediately that this woman wasn't just there for her money. She was there for her life. I asked her gently to tell me about her experience with the startup. She took a breath that sounded like a sob she had been holding back for months. She told the court she had worked 40 years to ensure she would never be a burden to her children. She trusted Thorne's app because it promised silver security. Then, in one afternoon, $200,000, her entire life's work, vanished. Thorne didn't even look at her. He examined his fingernails, looking bored by the tragedy he had orchestrated. It wasn't just a scam, it was a cold-blooded erasure of a human being's future. Marcus Thorne didn't even flinch when Mrs. Reed finished her testimony. He stood up, adjusted his silk tie, and looked at me as if I were a slow-witted student in one of his seminars. He claimed that Silver Secure was a sophisticated algorithm and that investment carries inherent risks. He had the nerve to say that these seniors had willingly signed a digital contract that outlined the possibility of total loss due to market volatility. He called it standard industry practice. In my courtroom, we don't call it practice, we call it a predatory script designed to exploit the gap between high-tech jargon and a retiree's trust. I opened the second evidence folder on my desk, the one containing the forensic audit of Thorne's software code. I asked him if he remembered the liquidity clause hidden on page 84 of his terms of service. He smiled that thin, practiced smile and said it was a standard protection for the company. But I had the testimony of the lead developer he had fired 3 months ago. This wasn't a protection, it was a trapdoor. I explained to the court that the moment a user's balance exceeded a certain threshold, the system triggered a glitch that diverted funds into a series of offshore accounts while showing a system maintenance screen to the user. Thorne tried to interrupt, claiming I didn't understand the complexity of blockchain architecture. I stopped him right there. I don't need to understand your code to understand a theft, Marcus. You didn't build a financial bridge, you built a digital vacuum. You used metaphors of safety and independence to lure people who spent their lives building this community into a space where you held all the keys. You treated their life savings like a video game where you were the only one allowed to win. This wasn't a market failure. It was a moral bankruptcy disguised as innovation. I asked him why the glitch only occurred on accounts held by individuals over the age of 65. He shifted his weight, the first sign of a crack in his polished armor. He claimed it was a demographic-specific technical error. I corrected him. It was a calculated target. You chose them because you thought they wouldn't understand how to track a digital footprint. You chose them because you thought their voices would be too quiet to reach a courtroom like mine. You didn't just steal their money, you bet on their silence. And today, Marcus, that is a bet you have officially lost. I looked at the gallery, at the 40 faces watching this man. They weren't looking for a return on investment anymore. They were looking for a return of their dignity. Thorne looked back at them, not with guilt, but with a calculated coldness, as if they were nothing more than outdated hardware that needed to be replaced. I've seen this before, the belief that being faster or smarter gives you the right to be more important. But in this room, the law is the great equalizer, and your algorithm doesn't have a loophole for a lack of a soul. I've spent decades following the breadcrumbs left behind by men who believe they are invisible because they operate behind a screen. But in my courtroom, there is no such thing as an anonymous crime. Marcus Thorne, you thought your private communications were shielded by the very technology you used to rob these people. You were wrong. Authority in this digital age is often simulated, but the evidence I am about to present is very real. I opened the third evidence folder. It wasn't a financial statement or a code audit. It was a transcript of a private Slack channel used by Thorne and his inner circle. The name of the channel was The Retirement Harvest. The gallery went cold as those words echoed through the room. I asked Thorne if he recognized the name. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the monitor behind me as the first messages appeared. You told your developers, and I quote, "Don't worry about the UI for the withdrawal page. Most of these users won't live long enough to need it. Just make the deposit button large and friendly. Use a warm shade of gold. It reminds them of their glory days." You didn't just design a product, you designed a psychological weapon. You looked at the 40 people in this room and didn't see human beings with histories, families, or needs. You saw an ATM with gray hair. Thorne's lawyer tried to object, claiming these were internal jokes taken out of context. I didn't let him finish. In this courtroom, when a joke involves the systematic erasure of a grandmother's hip surgery fund, it stops being humor and becomes a confession. Marcus, you weren't just networking or using resources available to you, as you might tell your board members. You were orchestrating a coup-lut KO, a reversal of fortune where the hardworking became the bankrupt and the predator became the billionaire. The most damning message came from the night of the system glitch, Mrs. Reed described. You sent a photo of yourself on a private jet, holding a glass of vintage champagne. Your caption read, "To the seniors of Florida, thanks for the wings. May your silver years be as bright as my new offshore balance." You laughed while Evelyn Reed was staring at a black screen on Christmas Eve, wondering if she would lose her home. You didn't just exercise power, you performed it with a level of cruelty that suggests you believe you are a different species than the people you hurt. I asked him to look at the gallery. For the first time, he hesitated. I told him to look into the eyes of the people he called his harvest. Because in my court, you aren't a visionary and you aren't a disruptor. You are a common thief who happened to use a keyboard instead of a crowbar. You bet on the fact that your complex systems would confuse me and protect you. But justice isn't complex, Marcus. It's very simple. You took what wasn't yours, and today, the system you tried to make work for you is going to hold you accountable until there is nothing left of your performance. Your legal team just stood up and whispered a number in my ear. Marcus. They call it a global settlement fund. They want to set aside a few $1 million to compensate the affected users in exchange for a full dismissal of the criminal charges. It is the oldest trick in the corporate playbook, trying to convert a felony into a line item on a balance sheet. You think that because you have venture capital backing, you can treat this courtroom like a vending machine where you insert cash and receive a not guilty verdict. It is a classic performance of simulated authority. But in this room, justice is not a commodity, and your checkbook doesn't have enough zeros to buy back the peace of mind you stole. They argued that a trial would be counterproductive and that the money could be distributed immediately to those who need it. It is a tempting offer for a system that is often overstretched. but I've learned to recognize a bribe even when it's wrapped in the language of a restitution agreement. You aren't offering this money out of the goodness of your heart. You're offering it because the evidence we've presented in the last hour has made your conviction a mathematical certainty. You want to buy your way out of the consequences of a crime you bragged about on a private jet. Let's talk about that friend you called at the regulatory board. We found the logs. Just like the board members who cut lines in emergency rooms, you reached out to someone with the power to look the other way. You called it strategic networking. I call it the systematic corruption of a regulatory body meant to protect people like Evelyn Reed. You didn't just bypass a glitch, you bypassed the law. You used your worth to ensure the system worked only for you, while leaving everyone else to drown in the wake of your success. I asked your attorney if he knew about the Harvest Channel before today. He didn't answer. He looked at the floor, just as you are doing now, because when the standard industry practice is exposed as a manual for theft, there is no defense left but to try and buy the silence of the judge. But Marcus, I am not a board member, and I am not a resource available for your convenience. My authority was earned through decades of upholding the truth, not through a series of seed rounds funded by the life savings of the elderly. I looked at the gallery again. The people sitting there aren't looking for a settlement. They are looking for a verdict. They want to see if the law actually applies to someone who can afford a lawyer that costs more than their houses. They want to see if cold justice is real or if it's just another performance. You told the world to know their worth, Marcus. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what yours is. And I can promise you, it has nothing to do with your offshore balance. Sit down. We are not negotiating your exit. We are documenting your collapse. Marcus, you stood here and tried to blame the complexity of the system for why these seniors lost their money, just as a man in another courtroom once tried to blame the healthcare system for his own lack of empathy. But the truth is much simpler and much more tan coke brutal. You didn't just take their money, you stole their time. You stole the years they had left where they didn't have to worry about how to pay for a meal or a medication. You looked at 40 human beings and saw obsolete hardware that could be discarded once you had harvested their data and their dollars. In my courtroom, what you heard from your lawyers wasn't a defense. It was a performance of arrogance that I am now going to dismantle. Let's talk about a name that hasn't been mentioned yet, Arthur Jenkins. Arthur was 82 years old. He was one of the first people to sign up for your Silver Secure app. He wasn't in the gallery today, because Arthur passed away 3 weeks ago. His daughter is here, though. She told my office that Arthur spent his final nights staring at your system maintenance screen, wondering if he had failed his family. He blamed himself for being too old to understand the technology, when the reality was that a 29-year-old genius had designed that technology specifically to gaslight him. You didn't just exercise power, Marcus. You performed a kulat keo kin hai, a terrifying reversal, where you turned a man's pride into his greatest source of shame. I asked you earlier if you knew Arthur's name. You didn't. You don't know any of their names because, to you, they aren't people, they are demographics. You told your board that you were disrupting the market. But what you were actually disrupting was the social contract that holds this community together. When people can no longer trust that their life's work is safe from a predator with a keyboard, the system itself begins to collapse. You are a Sat Tho Vohin, an invisible killer, not of bodies, but of the trust that allows a society to function. You mentioned your charitable contributions earlier, suggesting they should mitigate your crimes. Do you really think that donating a fraction of your stolen loot to a gallery or a museum buys you a vikuting, a savior status in this room? It is the ultimate cynicism. You rob the poor to give a little to the rich and call it impact. In my court, your worth is not measured by the names on the buildings you fund. It is measured by the names of the people you destroyed to get there. Arthur Jenkins' name carries more weight in this courtroom than yours ever will, because he earned his life, while you merely performed yours. I watched you while Arthur's story was being told. You weren't even looking at his daughter. You were looking at your watch, calculating how many billable hours this interruption was costing your firm. That is the definition of contempt, not just for this court, but for the basic dignity of human life. You think you are the protagonist of this story, Marcus, and that everyone else is just a supporting character in your rise to the top. But today, you are going to learn that in the eyes of the law, you are the villain of a script that is about to reach its final, cold conclusion. Marcus Thorne, please stand. Your time as the architect of adversity has officially expired. I have listened to your high-priced experts. I have read your standard industry practice defense, and I have watched you examine your fingernails while the people you destroyed told their stories. You have sat in my courtroom and treated these proceedings as a minor inconvenience, a temporary pause in your strategic networking. You think that because you have built a digital fortress, the common laws of decency do not apply to you. You are mistaken. Authority in this room is earned through truth, not simulated through venture capital. This is not a negotiation. This is not a settlement. This is a cold, clinical dismantling of the performance you have called a career. You believe that money is the only language worth speaking, so I am going to address you in a dialect you will finally understand. You are hereby ordered to pay $150 million in immediate restitution. This is not just to cover the funds stolen from Evelyn Reed and the 40 families in this room. This is a punitive strike against every harvest you orchestrated behind your silver secure trapdoor. Every single dollar will be tracked. If even 1 cent is diverted to an offshore account, I will treat it as a fresh act of criminal contempt. But we are not stopping at numbers on a spreadsheet. You posted a video from a private jet bragging about how the system works for you, while everyone else reads magazines from 2019. You raised a wine glass to the camera and told the world to know their worth. Today, Marcus, I am going to strip away the symbols you use to simulate that worth. Officer Miller, please approach the defendant. Marcus, take off the watch. No, do not look at your lawyer. He doesn't have the authority to overrule a direct order from this bench. That watch is no longer a symbol of your success. It is now a down payment on the hip surgeries of the people in the third row. Hand it over. The court is also seizing your private aircraft and your primary residence. These assets are the fruits of a poisonous tree, and I am going to uproot that tree completely. You thought you were disrupting the market? Today, I am disrupting your ability to ever feel a sense of moral superiority again. I watched your face when I mentioned the seizure of your plane. For the first time today, you aren't looking at the ceiling. You are looking at reality. It is a culotte KO, a total reversal that you never saw coming because you were too busy looking down at everyone else. You aren't a visionary anymore. You are a man with empty wrists standing in a wrinkled suit, and your worth in this room is currently exactly 0. You aren't the predator today, Marcus. You are the evidence. And the evidence shows that when you take the life savings of those who built this country, the system doesn't just work for you, it collapses on you. You think that by handing over your assets, you have paid your debt to society. You haven't. You have only cleared the ledger for the financial theft. Now, we begin the restitution of your soul, if there is any part of it left to find. Marcus Thorne, for the next 18 months, you are prohibited from entering a boardroom, a private jet, or a luxury restaurant. Instead, your new office will be the kitchen and the common room of the Sunrise Senior Center, the very place where Evelyn Reed and her friends gather to discuss how they were going to survive the glitch you so carefully engineered. You are sentenced to 600 hours of physical community service. In that center, you will not be an advisor. You will not be a consultant. You will be a janitor. You will mop the floors. You will scrub the tables. You will fetch water and blankets for people who spent 40 years on their feet building this community while you were busy disrupting their peace. And you will perform every minute of this labor wearing a high-visibility yellow vest that clearly states in bold letters, "Court-ordered volunteer." I see the look on your face, Marcus. You find this requirement humiliating. You think it is beneath a man of your stature to be seen cleaning up after the people you scammed. That is the point. Humility is the only antidote for the kind of arrogance that believes a silver secure app is a license to prey on the vulnerable. You need to see the faces you dismissed as data points. You need to look into their eyes and understand that every person you ignored is a human being with a story more valuable than your entire tech empire. If you miss a single shift, or if I receive one report of you being dismissive, rude, or checking your watch while you are supposed to be serving, I will hold you in contempt of court immediately. As I have told others who believed they were untouchable, If you spend time in my jail, your company will survive 3 days without you. And if it doesn't, then maybe you weren't as essential as you led your investors to believe. You wanted to make the system work for you, Marcus. Now you are going to work for the system. One bucket of soapy water at a time. I am also ordering a special condition of your probation. You will be required to attend a 6-week ethics and privilege course held at the community center every Thursday evening. You will sit in a circle with other people who have misused power, and you will learn why your networking was actually a betrayal of the public trust. You will not be the speaker, you will be the listener. And if you attempt to use your influence to bypass any of these requirements, I will ensure that the next 3 years of your life are spent in a cell where no one cares who you are. Marcus, there is one final matter we need to address before you are led away. Throughout this entire proceeding, you have shown a profound contempt not just for the people you hurt, but for this court and the very idea of accountability. When Mrs. Reed was reliving the most painful moment of her life, you were dismissive and rude. When I presented evidence of your malice, you laughed. That behavior has a price, and that price is not payable in cash. Officer Miller, please approach the defendant and prepare the handcuffs. Marcus Thorne, you are hereby held in contempt of court. You will spend the next 72 hours in county jail. This is not your sentence for the fraud that will begin after your release. This is a 3-day period for you to sit in a cell and realize that your business deals and your valuable time mean nothing when you violate the times of dignity of this courtroom. You think you are essential, Marcus, but your company will survive 3 days without you. And if it doesn't, then you were never the genius you claimed to be. As the door closed behind him, the courtroom finally fell into a true silence. I looked out at the 40 seniors in the gallery. They weren't cheering, they were exhaling, because they knew that for one day, the system didn't break under the weight of a billionaire's influence. But we have to be honest about the democratic cost of people like Marcus Thorne. When wealth is used to simulate authority and bypass the law, the social contract doesn't just bend, it snaps. When people see a tech CEO bragging about a harvest while they struggle for hip surgery, they stop believing in the system entirely. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. It is about reminding the powerful that they are not a different species, and reminding the vulnerable that they are not invisible. My job is to ensure that the millionaire and the nurse both know the rules apply equally to them. If we allow money to buy a place at the front of the line, whether in an emergency room or a retirement fund, we have already lost our democracy. I sat alone in my courtroom for a long time after the lights were dimmed. I thought about Evelyn Reed, about the late Arthur Jenkins, and about the man in the cell who finally had to face a reality he couldn't code his way out of. Tomorrow, there will be more cases and more performances of power. But tonight, the record shows that in this room, accountability was not a fantasy. It was a cold, hard fact. I stood up, turned off the lights, and locked the door. The case is closed.